They tell you to be yourself. They say authenticity is everything, that the world needs your truth, your heart, your vulnerability, that showing up raw and real is the highest form of courage. But then, when you do, you get burned. You open up and they call you weak. You show your fears and they call you unstable. You give them honesty and they give you distance. They say they want the truth until it's not convenient. And somewhere in that tension, between your need to be known and your instinct to protect, something breaks. You learn the ancient truth Machiavelli knew all too well. Never show them your true face. Machiavelli didn't write for the innocent or the idealist. He wrote for the survivor, for the leader who had seen too much, for the human soul shaped by power, betrayal, and the cold reality of the world. In The Prince, he laid it out without apology. Appearances matter more than essence. Reputation trumps virtue. People care less about who you truly are and more about who you appear to be. And in a world that rewards masks, sometimes the only way to survive is to wear one. This is not about deception for its own sake. This is about protection, about strategy, about knowing that in a world where motives are questioned and vulnerabilities are exploited, the true self is not always a gift, it's a liability. Machiavelli didn't say, never be good. He said, it is necessary to appear to have virtues, but with a mind so disposed that when it is necessary to be the opposite, you know how. In other words, be flexible, be adaptable, show only what will serve your purpose. To be loved is ideal. To be feared, he said, is safer. It's easy to dismiss that as cold, but think about the world we live in now. We post our highlights and hide our breakdowns. We curate personalities online and shrink the parts that don't get likes. We measure worth in engagement. We mistake attention for affection. And when someone really sees us, beyond the filter, beyond the image, we often feel exposed, not empowered. Modern life is Machiavellian. We're all performing, all negotiating which parts of ourselves are safe to share. And behind the scenes, we wonder who would stay if they saw all of me. Never show them your true face is not just a warning. It's a reflection of how the world reacts to honesty, because people want authenticity, in theory. But in practice, they want palatable truths, manageable pain, strength dressed up as vulnerability. They want depth, but not if it's messy, not if it requires patience, not if it challenges their assumptions. So we learn to edit ourselves. We become watchful, cautious. We learn to calculate not what is true, but what is useful, and it works. You become the version of you that thrives in the room, the one who gets approval, who is respected, who is rarely misunderstood, because you never risk enough to be misread. You smile when you want to scream. You nod when your gut says no. You charm when your soul wants to retreat, and the world applauds your composure. But they don't know what it's costing you, because there's a price to hiding. There's a quiet grief in never being fully seen, in performing your life instead of living it, in wondering at the end of every interaction, if they knew the truth, would they still care? That's the shadow side of the Machiavellian mask. Yes, it protects you. Yes, it serves you, but it can also isolate you. It can cut you off from intimacy, from belonging, from the experience of being loved, not for your utility, but for your humanity. It teaches you to be effective, but not known. And after enough time, the mask fuses to your skin. You forget who you were before the performance began. So what do? Do you choose strategy or sincerity, survival or truth? Maybe it's not either or, maybe it's both, because the mature response is not to live maskless. It's to wear your masks consciously, to know when you are performing and why, to know the difference between strategic concealment and self-betrayal, to understand that there are spaces for rawness and spaces where restraint is wisdom. That's what Machiavelli teaches us, not to lie, but to live with precision. Not to suppress your truth, but to reveal it only where it will be respected. There is power in discretion. There is strength in knowing who deserves your truth and who only deserves your silence. And there is nothing weak about boundaries, because your soul is sacred. Your story is sacred. and not everyone has earned the right to hold it. And this doesn't mean you become hollow, it means you become discerning. It means you know the difference between connection and consumption, between someone who listens and someone who collects your vulnerability like ammunition. Machiavelli wasn't advising cruelty, he was advising survival. And in a world that still misunderstands softness, still exploits openness, still confuses transparency with weakness, sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to be selectively visible. But there's another layer here, because while Machiavelli wrote for rulers and politicians, many of us are ruled by something else entirely: our fear of rejection, our fear of being misunderstood, our fear that if someone really knew us, if they saw the trauma, the shame, the parts we've hidden even from ourselves, they would leave. And so we hide. Not out of manipulation, out of defense, out of pain, out of the belief that our true self is too much or not enough. But here's the paradox: when you hide too long, when the mask becomes more familiar than your own skin, you don't just keep others out, you lock yourself in. At first, the performance feels protective, strategic, even empowering. You curate, adapt, present the best version of yourself because it keeps you safe. It wins you approval, it prevents rejection. And for a time that works. You become palatable, respected, admired. But slowly the performance begins to cost more than it gives. You become a prisoner of your own persona. You forget who you were before you started adapting to survive. You begin to mistrust your own instincts. You speak in rehearsed scripts rather than truths. You shape-shift so often you forget which shape was ever yours. You play roles so convincingly that even you forget their roles. You smile through sorrow, not because you're healed, but because you've learned that sadness makes people uncomfortable. You entertain through emptiness because your worth feels tethered to how useful or likable you are. You lead while limping because strength is expected, even when you're barely standing. You become everyone's strength while privately falling apart. And the irony is cruel. The more you hide your pain, the more people assume you're fine. And the more they assume you're fine, the more alone you feel. You begin to wonder why no one sees your struggle, why no one checks in, why no one holds space for the version of you that's exhausted. But how could they? You never showed them your true face. This is the cost of chronic masking, not just emotional exhaustion, but existential disconnection. Carl Jung would say that what you are repressing, you are also becoming ruled by, that the face you bury becomes the voice of your shadow. You stop being a person and start being a brand, a set of traits designed for consumption, a role performed so often it starts to replace the soul underneath. This is not just personal psychology, it's systemic. Sociologists call this impression management, the theory that in social settings, especially those involving power or status, we are constantly managing the image we project. Irving Goffman, in his landmark work, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, argued that life is a stage, and we are all actors, performing different selves for different audiences. But Goffman also noted the danger: when there is no backstage, when there is no space to drop the performance, we lose the sense of authenticity. We lose self. And that loss is not without consequence. Studies in modern psychology link long-term emotional masking to increased levels of depression, anxiety, and even physical illness. Suppressing emotions doesn't just silence your truth, it dysregulates your nervous system. It keeps your body in a low-grade fight or flight mode. You're not just hiding, you're surviving, and survival is not the same as living. So maybe there's wisdom in the Machiavellian mask. Maybe, at times, it's necessary. In politics, in war, in navigating environments where truth is weaponized and vulnerability is punished. Even Jung recognized that not all truths are ready to be seen, that some shadows, when prematurely exposed, can destroy rather than heal. But there's also wisdom in knowing when to take it off, when to say, "Here I am." Not the curated version, not the filtered one, not the one that wins the room, just me. And yes, some people will walk away because the truth you carry might be too much for those who are still hiding from their own. But others, they will move closer. Not because your mess doesn't scare them, but because they're tired of hiding too, because there's something magnetic about someone who can sit in their truth without apology, something disarming, human, freeing. The world teaches us to perform, but healing invites us to return, not to naivete, not to blind vulnerability that gets handed out to everyone, but to wholeness, to a life where we wear the mask when we must, but we know it's a mask, to relationships where we're strategic, but not shape-shifting to the point of losing ourselves, to friendships that can hold contradictions, the laughter and the grief, the confidence and the doubt, the curated self and the raw truth underneath. This is the balance. This is emotional sovereignty, where you get to choose when to reveal and to whom, where you're no longer performing for approval, but showing up with intention. So, yes, never show them your true face is a powerful rule. But maybe it's not a law, maybe it's a mirror. A moment to pause and ask, which parts of me am I still hiding? And why? Is it truly protecting me or simply preventing me from being known? Because here's the truth. Your face, the real one, is not a flaw. It's not a liability. It's where your power lives, the power to connect without control, to lead without losing yourself, to be seen without shrinking. And when you find people, rare people, who see that face and stay, the ones who don't need you to dilute yourself for their comfort, the ones who don't require you to shrink, to be palatable, or to wear strength like armor in order to be respected. When someone holds your truth in their presence without trying to fix it, dismiss it, or change it, something fundamental shifts inside you. You realize love is not meant to be earned. It's meant to be received, not for your perfection, not for your polish, but for your presence, for your being. Because in a world that has trained you to perform, to be likable, productive, impressive, finding someone who can hold your unfiltered self is a rare, almost spiritual experience. It feels like being met in the mirror without distortion. It feels like air returning to lungs that have been holding their breath for years. And when that happens, when your full self is not just tolerated but welcomed, you stop surviving. You start living. Because survival is what happens when you're constantly scanning for danger, when your nervous system is in fight or flight, and your personality becomes armor. But living? Living begins when safety is no longer a performance, but a place. When you no longer have to adapt to earn connection. When you're allowed to simply be. Psychologically, this is what developmental theorists call earned, secure attachment. It happens when, after a history of disconnection or conditional love, someone finally offers consistent presence, not as a savior, but as a witness, as a mirror that reflects your wholeness, not just your function. According to Dr. Dan Siegel, relationships like this allow the brain to reorganize itself, literally rewiring old relational templates. That's why it feels like peace, because on a neurobiological level, your body is finally safe enough to rest. You stop questioning if you're too much. You stop apologizing for your needs. You stop adjusting your truth for the sake of harmony. Instead, you exhale. And in that exhale, you begin to build something new, something real. Not based on performance, which is conditional, but based on presence, which is unedited, not based on image, which is fragile, but based on integrity, which is enduring. You don't have to keep explaining yourself, translating yourself, or dressing your authenticity in something easier to digest. You simply are, and you are accepted as such. That's not just intimacy, that's liberation. You stop being a version, and you start being a whole, because that's what masking robs us of, wholeness. Every time you hide a part of yourself, every time you perform to be liked, you splinter, you divide, you fracture, and those fractures create quiet grief. Grief for the self you abandoned, grief for the truth you withheld, grief for the life you could have lived had you trusted you were already enough. But when the mask drops, when you return to yourself, you stop living in fragments. You begin to integrate, you begin to heal, not in a straight line, not instantly, but honestly. And that is the quiet revolution Machiavelli didn't write about, but one we are all invited to live.